what happened was a year ago, the government of British Columbia passed a statute called the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. A historic statute. It's quite an amazing thing. What it does is it adopts UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and it makes it part of the law of British Columbia. Historic. No other legislature in Canada, maybe in the world that we know of, has taken UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration, and made it part of domestic law. British Columbia has done that. It's a great accomplishment that British Columbia did, and I'm very proud of our government for doing that. I remember being at a meeting in Victoria a year ago and seeing Premier Horgan receive a standing ovation. 700 people were in the room. They all stood up on their feet and gave Premier Horgan a standing ovation about that accomplishment, about that specific thing. He said, and we passed this statute, and they all stood up and gave him applause. You will have recalled in the most recent provincial election campaign, one of the things that Premier Horgan said when he ran for re-election, one of the accomplishments that he stood behind was the fact that they passed that statute. Now I want to tell you a little bit about what that statute does and what's this disconnection between the statute, the high aspiration of that statute, and what actually happens on the ground, the pleading of abandonment. There's this big gap that we need to close. Since then, I want you to know that the Nuchatlaht people haven't just sat around. We have been to meet with government officials, with members of the legislature, with members of cabinet, and we've said, you passed that statute, you've adopted UNDRIP, now implement it. Now stop saying that we abandoned our land. We've met with all of them. They know that Nuchatlaht are there. They know that Nuchatlaht are complaining that the government is still pleading abandonment in this court case. It's time for them to stop doing that. I want to tell you what UNDRIP says. The United Nations Declaration, I'm going to read you the passage. It says, Indigenous peoples have the right to the lands, territories, and resources which they have traditionally owned, occupied, or otherwise used or acquired. That's subsection 26.1. And 26.3 says, states shall give legal recognition and protection to these lands, territories, and resources. It's powerful language. What that means is British Columbia must give legal recognition and protection to the lands that the Nuchatlaht have traditionally owned and occupied. And that UNDRIP, that international treaty, is adopted as the schedule to British Columbia's statute, which is called the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. And so the statute itself, which adopts the whole treaty as its schedule, the statute itself says this. It says, in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous peoples, the government must take all measures necessary to ensure the laws of British Columbia are consistent with UNDRIP. Must take all measures to ensure that the laws of British Columbia are consistent with the declaration. That's the promise. That's the promise that's made. It's not just a promise, it's a legislated mandate. It's required that every government official act in compliance with UNDRIP. Now, last month on October 8th, the Sinuxt case was heard by the Supreme Court of Canada. That's a case about whether or not certain First Nation that's now located in the United States, but used to be in Canada and basically got driven out of Canada, whether they have rights to hunt in Canada. And without getting into the complexity of that case, one of the things that British Columbia says in that case is that they abandoned their territory in British Columbia. So Nuchatlaht intervened at that case. We intervened, and as interveners, there was about 15 or 20 interveners got to speak at the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Supreme Court of Canada is operating by Zoom, just like this nowadays. We didn't actually go to Ottawa, but it's got all of the pomp and ceremony of the Supreme Court of Canada, except it's by Zoom. It was kind of funny, actually. I had to put on my full court robes and sit, at Zoom in my office. Anyway, we had 5 minutes, like all the other interveners. And in those 5 minutes, I'll tell you what we said. We said to the Supreme Court of Canada, look, British Columbia is pleading abandonment here. They're pleading abandonment in the Nuchatlaht case. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. Not only is that pleading wrong in law, it's also unlawful for them to be pleading that now, because they've passed a law saying they won't ever do that. So they should they don't have to, the Supreme Court of Canada doesn't have to weigh the submission about whether or not abandonment is lawful or not. All they have to do is disregard those submissions, because British Columbia has now promised in its legislation that they won't do that anymore. Now look, it's hard to draw, I'm proud of our government for passing this fabulous statute, but it's a big organization. And all the way down, all of those staff, all of those lawyers that work for the government, all of those deputy ministers, all of those civil servants, the message has to come from the top. You now have to change your behavior. You now have to act in accordance with this law. You can no longer undermine First Nations who are claiming their Aboriginal title. You have to support them. You have to take all measures necessary to implement the United Nations Declaration. That's the mandate. It's required. It's the law. And that's what we said to the Supreme Court of Canada just on October 8th. Nuchatlaht, little Nuchatlaht went to the Supreme Court of Canada and said that. And now here we are, back to our case, our project at hand. The first claim in coastal British Columbia of Aboriginal title, the first time that a First Nation is going to say, okay, time to implement not just the Chilcotin decision, but time to implement UNDRIP right here, right now. Let's stop fiddling around. Let's stop clear-cutting these ancient forests, and let's look at the fact of who actually owns these forests. Let's take this seriously. That's what the Nuchatlaht are doing. It's funny that it's such a tiny little First Nation, but they're tiny, but they are so authentic. The Nuchatlaht Nation are one of the real, true, original, authentic nations that still, in a powerful way, maintain their traditions and are respected up and down the coast for being who they are, for being that, having that ancient tradition of hospitality, of generosity, of pride of who they are, and of, despite their small numbers, of willingness to put up that fight, to say, we're going to stick up for what's right. So we're all kind of lucky, I think. I feel lucky to know Archie and Jordan. Jordan, I call him Jordan. It's like calling Queen Elizabeth Lizzie. You know, I mean, he's the Tai of the Nuchatlaht Nation, and I can get away with calling him Jordan because I know him, but he has a ancient and honorable title, and he is as to the Nuchatlaht Nation as Elizabeth is to the British nation. He's the head guy, and he holds that position as a kind of super trustee on behalf of that whole community, and he's tasked with trying to get that land back. And it's wonderful that all of you are here participating in this webinar and able to hear Archie. I just want to rehearse a little bit of what Archie did. He took you through some of those histories of all of those family connections. You know, Archie knows who people's grandparents and great-grandparents were, and all the way back the line. You know, you talk to your friends in the non-Indigenous community and say, can you name all 8 of your great-grandparents? Not many people can. Archie can. Archie knows, he knows that history because that's who they are. They are the people of that land. They've always been there. So with that, I want to thank you for listening to me go on. I want to emphasize that this is about a particular problem that we can solve. We can solve this problem. We can solve it now with this newly elected government. We can say, okay, do the right thing. Stop pleading abandonment. Do that. That's a good way to start. Thank you very much.